Hello, welcome to another episode of Unlocked. Today, my friends, we are going to talk to Andy Polaine. Andy is a really brilliant mind when it comes to this idea of creative industry type stuff merged with leadership, which is a passion of mine as well. So Andy and I, we spoke a lot before the show, after the show. I think we talked more outside of the show than we did inside the show, but you still got some good stuff in here. I promise you got some good stuff coming. Andy is a design leadership coach, educator, and speaker. He worked at Fjord, where he was the global group design director of a client evolution. He's also co-authored a book called Service Design from Insight to Implementation. And he holds a PhD from the University of Technology in Sydney. Andy has if you go to his website, he has a newsletter there called Doctor's Notes, and he hosts the Power of 10 podcast. So you can find him in a bunch of different places. So Andy and I, as we get into this conversation, we start talking about, the idea of creative leadership, some of the problems with the mentality around creative leadership, and what goes into what we need to do as far as creative leadership is concerned and how we should evolve creative leadership in the future. And we also talk about this idea of should schools, creative schools, be responsible for teaching this inside of their programs. Well, anyway, we'll get to that question and more on this show. Here we come, Andy. Andy, this is quite a treat for me to have you on the show. As someone who coaches creative leaders, I love it. I want to pick all your brain stuff right now.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is good. I love that we connected and that we got in touch. I don't have people like you on the show all the time. This is where my heart is. Creative leadership is where I come from. And anytime I get to educate this audience, let's do it. So that's what we're here for.
Let's go.
Tell me, first of all, give me a really quick brief of your background and why you ended up where you are.
Okay, that's always difficult. The quick version is
quick version, Andy. Quick version.
Quick version is wanted to be a film director. Ended up studying a kind of different media kind of program, and including film. But when interactive multimedia, very early 90s, like 1990 or 91, started, and I kind of got sidetracked by that. So I got into what is now like interaction design and UX and all the rest of it, also digital, pre-web, a lot of stuff, and worked in that industry for most of my life. I've also been teaching quite a lot of that. I got interested in the sort of design of organizations and organizational change as the design process. And a friend of mine, Ben Reason, said, who I co-wrote this book about service design with, said, well, we do this thing called service design. And that for me was like, oh my God, this has a name. The way I think has a name and a methodology. So I sort of segued into that quite a lot, teaching it and also doing it. Before I set up on my own again now, I was at Fjord, which is now Accenture Song. It's part of Accenture at the time, and was a design director and then a regional design director in Asia Pacific there, helping design teams and working with clients and Accenture stakeholders. And then I left, and I had been doing a lot of sort of mentoring and coaching as part of my work and also part of my teaching. And I realized that I really like doing that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last about three and a half years is coaching design leaders, creative leaders, from everyone from sort of senior lead up to VP and CDO, actually Chief Design Officer.
Let me ask you this, your opinion. What is the desire level for creative leaders as a whole in our industry to seek out leadership development? Are they aware that they need it? Are they wanting it? Are they like, what do you feel is the need out there?
Yeah, I think there's a need, right? And whether how conscious people are of it or not is another question. I mean, I've definitely worked with people who I've kind of thought, well, you could really do with some coaching. and they're really unaware of the fact that they could. So there's that. I think there's quite a lot of a need. I think there's a lot of people feel like one of the things that happens is when you rise up in design, particularly if you're in-house, like working in a bank or a telco, or wherever it is, as a design person, or even a startup, you're often the most senior design person in that organization, and it's really lonely. And on top of that, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and I've got no one. You obviously can't talk to your boss or your kind of necessarily your peers, or certainly not your reports, and say, listen, I really feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm really anxious about this, and I'm really fearful about that. And so, that's my job really, is to be that person they can speak to who's also been through some of that stuff. I think it's really necessary, because I think as a leader, you have all your complexes, all the stuff, your baggage you carry, which we do bring into work. People think it's not personal, it's business. It's a complete lie. We bring everything into work, particularly working from home now a lot, and that gets magnified across lots of people. And so if you've got things that kind of push your buttons in a bad way, the higher up you are, the more influence that has on everyone else, and you can kind of you can become really kind of toxic by accident through that. But at the very least, there's a lot of sort of insecurity and worry, because also as a creative person, you're kind of moving into the sort of world of business much more, and dealing with kind of business leaders who just speak a really different language. They've got a really different kind of background to you, really different sensibilities. And that's also what adds to the loneliness. Now, it's less commonly known, I think, to have coaching in that field. It's not uncommon for someone like a CEO to write it into their contract that they have a coach, right? A lot of senior business people have a coach, executive coach, as kind of part of parcel of the thing. And I think a lot of design folks think, oh, I should just be able to do this themselves. But I'm obviously selling myself a bit here, but I think it really helps them when they have someone they can talk to.
I agree. I going up in the ranks, I always say that, design or agency leaders, creative leaders learned leadership from people who never knew how to lead.
Yeah,
Because they learned
by
from people who never learned how to
accident.
lead, right? It was just this perpetuated idea. It was just a cycle that people were just
Yeah,
going in. And so that was how, that's what happened to me. I was mentored and brought up by brilliant designers, not always brilliant leaders. And,
yeah,
they would probably admit that as well, but they're brilliant designers, great people who meant
yeah.
well, but that's where I learned to lead from. And then when I ran my agency, I was like, leadership stuff, that's for the suits. That's for like
Exactly, right.
the
Yeah,
corporate people. Like, I don't do that. I'm cool. Everybody loves our culture,
yeah.
So do you feel that that's kind of the vibe out there?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of that. I think there's quite a lot of that, actually. And part of it's interesting what you're talking about, because that definitely is there. Of like, if you were lucky, you happen to be working with some people or under some people who are really useful role models for you, and from whom you learned, and all the rest of it. If you weren't, well, then you're not, and then you don't have that stuff. And literally, you're talking like sort of a couple of generations of at least, and it's not even like it's like work generations, which are a bit shorter. Design was in a very different place in the organization, I think, than where it is now. I think it's going through yet another kind of transformation. But I think where the kind of leadership and conversations those people from those couple of generations back, I think, were quite different from the kind of more intense stakeholder conversations that are going on that senior design leaders are involved in now.
Tell me about the journey from, like, that early on. I'm a designer. I'm a art director. I'm a copywriter. I'm a video editor. Like that what we call collaborator, right? That individual
Your
contributor.
contributor, yeah.
Yeah. So moving into now, I have to lead people. There's a big
Yeah.
chasm there, but like,
There is.
tell me
There's a
about that
thing
journey.
I call the dip, which I'm sort of starting to slightly reconfigure the little sort of diagram for that, because it's kind of a roller coaster, because there's sort of multiple dips. Lots of people then in design leadership have said to me, as I've been writing this book, well, actually, there's sort of several dips I had after that, and so I think what goes on. So I think there's a thing that's going on. I was just reading about an article about this today. I actually think it goes on sort of teenage years. you kind of decide, people say, what do you want to do for a living? And you say, well, something in the creative arts and design and stuff. There's plenty of people around you who sort of go, oh, well, yeah, that's difficult career. It's not very stable, all the rest of it. Can't earn much money that way, you sure? And all that stuff. So if you opt for it anyway, you sort of bias towards being someone who's happy and comfortable with ambiguity. And if you're not, and I don't mean to be judgmental by this, I think there's just other types of people go, no, that stuff's really, stability of a career ladder and everything like that is very important to me, and I prefer to do that. I think what has happened in a lot of business, certainly in consultancies, certainly in places, financial institutions and stuff, there's a massive over-index of kind of risk adverseness, and that's obviously the sort of tension between innovation and which is risky, and safety. I think what also happens though at school and certainly at uni is you kind of get, a lot of people get told they're not academically bright, right? And so they go, I'm a bit stupid, but I can draw. But there's a real kind of investment in the identity there around, I can make a thing. I can make a thing that someone else can look at and go, I can't do that. That's amazing what you do. And I actually think it's one of sort of really sort of inner psychological kind of makeups of a lot of people in design. It's not true absolutely of everyone, but it's common. And that just gets replicated, right? We talked about what you just said, which is, oh, that's for the suits, I'm cool, all of those kinds of things. You can hear the sort of echoes of that, of how we think about ourselves and our identities. And then what starts to happen when you move into a role where you make stuff less, and at some point you probably don't make anything at all other than, PowerPoint decks. What you're then starting to do is you move into this sort of management and leadership, and those are kind of two overlapping things on the Venn diagram. But you basically start dealing with people. Your job is to deal with people more than it is to deal with, pixels or pen and paper or whatever it is. Right? And so you unravel one identity, which is quite painful, right? It's quite existentially challenging to unravel your sort of identity that you forged over probably, 10, 15 years at least. And then to start taking on another one, which you're kind of a bit of a beginner at in many respects. So all of the kind of leadership and some of the management stuff. And so you go through this dip where you're sort of a little bit rubbish at both, or at least you feel that you are. It's like a confidence dip that you go through, and it can really spin people out. And like most of my coaching is helping people through that.
That is so real. It is I'm unconsciously incompetent of, becoming a designer. I'm a young designer. I'm coming out of school. I'm doing my thing. And then I get better and better throughout my career. Right. And I'm thriving. I'm crushing it and getting all kinds of awards and recognition. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to lead people, and then I'm going to dip, right? I go into the dip and I'm starting to realize that I'm actually incompetent again. And it's like from incompetence to now I'm competent to now I'm incompetent again. And now I'm having to raise up that competency level. And it can be discouraging and disheartening and just frustrating for people to move through that. But one of the principles that you note is that, hey, don't forget all the things that you learned developing your competency in design and art direction and doing the making of the thing.
Yeah.
How do people take what they learned in that competency and move it over into their new competency? So we don't have to forget the fact that we used to push pixels.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we take those ideas and integrate them into leadership?
Yeah, I'm really glad you said the competency thing. You've just reminded me of, as part of the research for the book, I interviewed ex-colleague and friend of mine, Martha Cotton, who was the global head of design research practice at Fjord, and then ended up co-leading Fjord, and has now left and is working somewhere else. But she talked about becoming confident in her competence, and that was a really important moment for her. And actually, it's a mix of those two that you just talked about, because one of the things she said, I've spent the last 20, 30 years kind of having the same conversation. For her, it's all about kind of the value of research and the value of qualitative research, as well as quant and the rest of it. And, it's at some point she kind of, having felt insecure about this, sort of stepped into this moment of, no, I can do this. I can take this practice that I know very, very well, and it's very important and has a lot of value for the business. And I can articulate this in a way that lands with those people. right? The lands with people who don't understand, may not care about research, but in a way that's important to them, and therefore, it gains traction, and therefore, we are able to do it and provide impact to the organization. And it was a kind of repetition of that got her that confidence in her competence. But I think it's a really good example of where you don't let go of the particular lens you bring as a designer. If you just become like another suit, and I've seen designers do this, and I don't really sort of judge them, but in some respects, if you get into a sort of leadership position in an organization and you'll kind of just act like another MBA only, and sort of jettison that early bit of your identity and your lens and this kind of viewpoint you bring, which is usually around, a deep understanding of people, a really good understanding of kind of relating to people, usually quite good skills in storytelling, and the designer's secret superpower, which is to make that stuff visual, like the ability to take a complex idea or an abstract idea and make it tangible in some form, whether it's a sketch or a prototype or whatever. That's incredibly powerful. It can create sort of instant alignment. If you kind of throw all of that out, well, then you're kind of just another MBA. And that seems to me to be a massive waste. And so I think, you need to have that confidence that those things actually matter. And that's kind of why you're there. Otherwise, they might as well have just hired someone else.
That's good. That's really good. I feel like as I moved into leadership, I was just creating, keynote presentations and proposals, and I felt like I had to design my keynote presentation because that was the only designing I was doing.
I've been there.
Or else when I would come in and just say, "Hey, that's not looking quite right. Can you scoot over so I can just get in there for a minute and
elbow someone out of the way?"
There's that too, right? So I think that when we look at what do we bring with us to leadership that we took with, I think it's an interesting thing about our profession is that a lot of us do come up through the ranks. We did start as a maker. We do become, that leader. And then we have the younger people that are looking to us for mentorship. And I think it's a lot of the times in design or in the trade of what we were doing with the thing we used to make. They're looking at us for mentorship on how to do the thing just like that. And that's just the stage of life that they're in. And I think we always, as leaders, need to keep this mentality of, I'm going to teach you to be good at that trade, but we also need to shift this mentality of I'm not just a maker. Like now I am somebody who needs to inspire, and I need to encourage, and I need to listen, and I need to lead, and I need to liberate, and I need to, like, how do I do that now so I can teach them to also do that when they become one, because eventually they probably will become one.
Yeah, well, hopefully. That's the perennial question, right? And that, I guess that's the work, right? Which is how do you do that? I think one of the key things in kind of life, as well as in design leadership or any other kind of leadership, actually, one of the things I'm realizing is this is much broader than just design or creative industries. I have some people from medicine and stuff say exactly the same, and engineering for that matter too, which is learning to kind of be yourself, right? And being comfortable with being yourself, because every time you're sort of puffing yourself up and trying to be something you're not is another little coin in the imposter syndrome box, right? And so, with that obviously comes the question of, well, who am I? What am I about? Really, if I'm going to be myself, what am I being authentic to? And that's quite an existential question. And so actually doing some work on that is really important to get a sense of, this is kind of how I tick. Now, all of us will flip out, and I've burnt plenty of bridges, and I've been a complete a-hole sometimes to other stakeholders where I just thought, that person just pushed my buttons really wrong. And that's, I've learned from a lot of those situations. But I think the idea is not to be sort of perfect all the time. The idea is to have this sense of this kind of center that you can come back to each time. And it's very much like a kind of mindfulness or a yoga. It's like not that you have to have perfect posture all the time, but you kind of recognize, oh my God, I'm slumping, and I kind of get back. And so when you get knocked around, you get quicker and quicker, you get back to kind of a sort of center of you again, and a confidence again around yourself. because you're just going to constantly be kind of battered around on that front. So I think that kind of that being comfortable with yourself, I don't. I think it's a thing that comes with age a bit, but I think I've also seen younger people get there annoyingly earlier too, and be sort of comfortable with that. There's a second thing you said though, which is I think it can be a little bit of a shocker to realise that more junior people take what you say really seriously. And I'm sort of one who covers. I'm English. I have this sort of slight, discomfort with the idea of being a leader anyway, and kind of who cares what I think and all of that stuff. And I often use sort of really lame sort of dad jokes and things to break that a little bit. But I've realised actually sometimes when I've made some of those kind of wisecracks that someone more junior has taken that really, really seriously. And I thought, oh, actually, I need to be a bit more mindful here. When I give feedback, it's not just I'm just someone giving feedback. It's like, oh, this is my boss or my most senior person giving me feedback. And that can often be taken as that's what I should be doing, when actually you might be should be thinking, well, that's just my thoughts on it. And so being kind of more mindful around that, it can be a little bit of a kind of rude awakening.
So how do you think, I guess I'm trying to think about how to phrase this question. How do you think the view or the idea of leadership is changing? I guess, and maybe in our industry versus outside, do you think it's the same as the way it's evolving and changing, or do you think just in our industry, in the creative industry, it's shifting and changing?
I mean, I think it's changing across the board, and I think you're seeing generational change. You're seeing also, things like COVID also shifted the power dynamics. Often, we had the sort of great resignation, and now we're having the sort of great firing in tech that's been going on. I think that it differs between cultures. I mean, I've lived in different countries and worked in different countries, and it differs a lot in different cultures. Traditionally Germany is very kind of hierarchical, and people pay attention to that hierarchy and care about it, and things like that. It's also different in different industries. I think some of the things that are similar, which is this idea of leadership being, I need to tell you what to do, because every employee is really just kind of work shy, kind of trying to get away with the least amount of work they can do possible, and therefore if I don't kind of micromanage you, you're going to just kind of rip us off. And there's a very sort of top down, very heavy kind of micromanagement culture that still exists around the place, and it depends on person to person. I think you just touched upon it in design. If you would have an art director or a creative director who's kind of directing a lot of the craft, like literally make the logo bigger stuff. I mean, or think about this differently in a craft sense. I think that there's been this whole servant leadership thing. Simon Sinek has got kind of a lot to answer for there, which can easily lead into martyrdom, where people then sort of take the hits for their team and they just burn out because they're trying to kind of just constantly sort of serve both masters, and they just destroy themselves. And you can't do that either. The way I like to think of it, and where I think the sort of hopefully the shift is going, is to think of leadership. I much prefer to think of enabler rather than leader as a word, because you can enable good behavior and you can enable bad behavior and toxic behavior too. Right? We talk about enabling an addict and those things. We also talk about sort of enabling things like bullying and racism and things like that. By not doing anything about it. But you can enable people too by positively. And what you're really trying to do there is not tell them what to do. You're trying to kind of, in some respects, kind of get out of the way or take away the obstacles. But sometimes those are internal in those people. So one of the things I really learned from teaching was this person is kind of stuck here, and it's not stuck because they're not stuck because they're stuck with the craft. They're stuck because they're kind of blocked themselves internally. And my job is to try and kind of unblock them, and that goes for also stakeholder management. Right? There's a lot of fear and anxiety like everywhere in work, and I think if you can think about this person is being really difficult stakeholder, senior whoever, to our design team. What is it they're afraid and anxious about, and how can I enable them to to not be afraid and anxious, and how can I enable my team not to kind of respond to that in this kind of high frequency way where it just kind of makes it worse. And I much prefer to kind of think of it like that than telling people what to do.
Let me ask you this question. I'm posing this one to you, and you're not ready for this because I just thought of it like 10 seconds ago. I don't even know if I'm ready for this. What do you think the responsibility is? I didn't just think about this right now. I thought about just asking you right now. What do you think the responsibility is of schools, creative schools, to teach leadership principles? Because
I've thought
they
about this
don't.
a lot, so that's good. So
I'm
ready for this question. I've thought about this a lot.
Have you?
I'm ready for this question.
Yeah. Good. I want this because my whole thing is like we go to learn the craft. My school taught the craft. That enabled me to be better and to think through problems with Photoshop or with any other program I'm using, but also some of the design process and things, right?
Yeah.
My school, brilliant when it came to that. But what's the responsibility to teach leadership? Because one day they don't really say, oh, by the way, you might be a leader one day. They'll really tell you that part of it.
So absolutely. So I do teach my master's students this, actually. So I teach on I co-teach a master's of service design, co-lead a master's of service design in Lucerne in Switzerland. And one of the courses we teach is called Leading Conversations. And some of it's around conversations within your team. So when you're working together, how do you kind of negotiate some of this stuff? Some of it is around, working with stakeholders and thinking about when do conversations happen? So I have this whole kind of thing about sort of, are the right people enabled to have the right conversations at the right time in the right way? Right? And if you unpack it and go, well, who are the right people? Good question. What's the right time? Good question. All of those things are useful questions to unpack and make you think about, when should engineering and design talk to each other? And in what way? Is this a quick Slack thing, or is this something where we actually have to have a kind of a formal thing? Is it something that's a workshop? Because different kinds of conversations can take different forms into sort of different media, and they're not all equal. And the intent is not equal. And so actually sort of doing some intentional work around that, and that's what I try and teach the students, is really useful. I think there's other stuff that they will, and I talk about a lot of this stuff too, and particularly because they're service design students. Service design has a very large component of sort of stakeholder management in the organization, and there's a lot of sort of organizational change stuff that service design often kicks off. So it's kind of part of the job. And I think it's really, really important. And, they're partly because design schools have come through this kind of technical college kind of pathway evolution from where they did just teach the craft. And it's a very sort of Bauhausian thing as well to kind of do that. And then they've sort of evolved to where they are now. For me, I mentioned I studied film. And one of the things that really, really early on that I learned at film school, I studied film, digital media, film, video, this new thing called digital media and photography. And in film and video in particular, we were graded as a team, right? And you would have a camera person, you would have a director, a producer, a script writer, and they might have been, someone might have taken 2 of those roles or something. But there were 2 parts. Like, well, your film is okay. It looked amazing, well done, camera person, and kind of lighting person. But the script was terrible. Or, it was a complete fiasco in the making of this and stuff. So the producer was, is terrible. So I learned very early on the importance of that kind of collaborative, cross-disciplinary way of working together and negotiating those things. And it was really on us. Like if something fell apart because we all sort of just were at each other's throats, our lecturers would just be like, well, you needed to sort that stuff out. And I think it's really important. But what I do know is I think the stuff that I'm teaching my students now, they probably will not thank me for. They do later, until a few years later. Right? And then I think that stuff is like, oh yeah, I remember having,
Yeah, I didn't realize I wasn't learning that stuff. And
no,
you don't know what you don't know.
No, and it isn't taught in design school, and it is really, really crucial because that was a real moment for me. I can almost just remember the exact moment where I realized, oh my God, this job, like my design teams never came to me. I say my teams, our design teams never came to me. Well, rarely, like perhaps I could count on one hand, stuck with a piece of designing, usually it's around a synthesis thing or maybe a kind of research thing, but not the actual design. Because if people have been doing it for sort of 5-10 years, they kind of know what they're doing. it was always people stuff. Is this stakeholder's a real pain? This team member is really being disruptive or is problematic. This, whatever it is, it was just like all people stuff.
And I think the value also comes in to where me as a maker and as a whatever, I evolve into an owner, maybe of an agency or a partner or
Mm.
whatever I get to that level. And now I'm not only working with creatives, I'm working with account managers and I'm working with project managers and I'm working with CFOs and I'm working with sales and I'm working with these different personalities
Yeah.
that are all being led by somebody who was once doing that creative quote unquote stuff.
Yeah.
And now you're having to think like a business person and manage different personalities and different dynamics in the office. And if you had the knowledge and the understanding of how to have conversations with different people, understanding different communication styles early
Mm.
on, how valuable would that be later on?
Yeah, it's really great. And what the one ways I phrase it to coachees is slow motion facilitation, because a lot of designers have done facilitation of workshops and stuff. And they're kind of reading the room. But there's a table there, and there's kind of four people working, and there's one person who's kind of on their phone, checked out. I've set this activity up and told everyone to get on, and then everyone turned to each other and said, "Oh, what is it we're supposed to be doing? I don't get it." What happened there, where I communicated something, it just kind of fell flat on the floor, and people don't know what's going on. There's the cadence of it. People need sort of buzzing up. There are people feeling really kind of de-energized, and what can we do? Individual stuff that's going to work for introverts, group stuff that's going to work for sort of extroverts or collaborative people. It's there's a lot of stuff there in the way we think about those skills that you can apply kind of over a longer period of time, over kind of weeks, months, years, and it's really nice for people, I think, to realize, oh, you mean those skills I can just use in being kind of a design leader and manager for that matter.
That's great. So when you work with individuals,
Yeah.
what do you think is one of the core issues you're helping them battle? So managing the dip is part of it.
Yeah.
What's that main thing though that you really help solve at the end of the day for these individuals?
So it is different, and I do a first session, which is kind of like a self-reflection thing, um, to go through this. Actually, that's I do a kind of 2-hour first session for this reason, and it's actually often the first time people have kind of sat down and went, yeah, what has been my pathway to here, and what am I all about, and all of that sort of stuff. Probably the first time since maybe deciding what they wanted to do for a degree that they've actually done that, and that's very useful to kind of get a sense of like who they are. And it differs in terms of where they're going. Some people have got, so my wife, who's a psychotherapist, and works in the room next door, and I've done psychotherapy for many years, because you can't be married to one and not do that. And I think it's actually something everyone should do. I think it's really that sort of self-discovery stuff. It wasn't for any particular kind of major issue. I just was interested to kind of understand myself more. And I think it's, the world would be a better place if everyone had done therapy. But there's kind of what I jokingly say is like therapy for designers down one end, and kind of very tactical stuff, almost like training down the other end, and sort of coaching's in the middle, and it moves around. So I think that sometimes people come and they really want something. They've got like a kind of burning tactical issue, like I've got this. I've just been promoted into this area. I need to put together this presentation, or I have anxiety around presenting. And I really struggle with this, or I've got, career matrix that I'm putting together. Sometimes that's very kind of tactical. Other people are just really lost. And other people get to that sort of dip, that middle part of their career. And it's often a midlife moment. So a lot, and not exclusively. I think my youngest coachee is 24. My oldest coach is probably about 53, but a lot of people are in their sort of mid to late 30s to late 40s. And it's a kind of classic period in life where they're like, well, I've got to where I thought I wanted to be, and now I'm here. It's either like, well, is this it? I'm not really sure that I want this. Or it's like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing here. And some people are much like, yeah, no, I'm really here and I want to get to the next level. And some people are, I hate where I work and I want to get out, but I'm not sure what I want to do. So there's different sort of pathways people take. But most of it is around helping them find what I call the shape of them. What is their shape? What they're all about? What do they do? What's roughly sort of what's their value proposition, right? What do they believe and what do they do? How do they go about doing it? Who are the people they help? What's the impact of what they do? This is a thing I stole from a friend of mine, Jeff Gothelf, who wrote a book called Forever Employable, where some of this is in. Really just getting a sense of being clear about this is who I am, and this is what I do, and these are some things I want to do, and this is what I don't do. And that second one is really crucial because you get so much stuff thrown at you. You really have to decide what you're going to say no to.
Right on, right on. So, Andy, I knew this was going to be enlightening, not just because you have a sophisticated accent, but because of the things that I knew would come out of your mouth. So that's it's really gold. And I hope that people will hear this. And if you're not a creative leader out there, these are just leadership principles in general.
Yeah.
I just feel the creative industry is lags behind, I think, the rest of the corporate world when it comes to this. And I think that's why some special care is what I'm trying to give to them. And so you've helped me do that. And I appreciate it. If people want to contact you, they want to hear more of your insights, want to hire you for something, for coaching or speaking or teaching or whatever they want you to do for them, where do they go?
They go to my website. It's Polaine.com. It's my surname. So Polaine. And there you'll find, me, my blog. You'll find my newsletter, which is called Doctor's Note. We had talked about this before. I am actually Dr. Polaine. I don't really use it. And you'll also my podcast, which is called Power of 10.
Okay. Gold, man. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you being on. Enjoy your time over there. Thanks for educating the next generation of leaders as they come up, and hopefully they're better than we are.
Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I've really enjoyed chatting with you, and you really enjoyed the questions.
I love how we started this whole conversation about the dip. The idea of being really great at something, and now we are having to humble ourselves as we go into this dip phase of incompetency when it comes to now leading people and teams and communicating with people that we're not normally communicating with, whether that is project managers or account managers, or whether it's accounting or any type of other department inside of the company that is not in the creative department. It's going to be an adjustment and a shift. And as we think about as our own journey into leadership as creative leaders, what is that thing that's holding us back? What is that thing that is preventing us from progressing? I don't want us to ignore what we've gained over the course of our careers and our journeys of being creators, of being makers. How can we take those things and pull them into what we're doing now? And the way Andy said it, which was really, really smart, is how do we take the thing we used to do, which we used to take information, ideas from clients, and we would gather them all, and it was a bunch of noise and a bunch of dust, and we would synthesize it, and we would make it into this beautiful whatever it was. At the end of the day, we produced something glorious that the client loved, that we loved, hopefully, and that delivered. It made the complex simple. And that is what we do, is we make the complex simple. We communicate things, solutions to problems in simple ways. And that is the key to leadership. We enable, that is the key to leadership. I'm grateful for Andy. Thanks for being here. It was awesome. If you want to find out more about me, you can go to skotwaldron.com. You can like, share, comment on my YouTube page, please. And if you want to listen on the audio, please do that too. Like, follow, subscribe, all that other stuff. On any audio platform that you listen to, you can find Unlocked with Skot Waldron there. And find me on LinkedIn as well. To all my friends out there who continue to watch the show and follow me there, thank you. And I will see you next time on another episode of Unlocked.